Hey everyone, thank you for joining the latest Worksome webinar and volume 2 in our IR35 series titled IR35 Repeal Scrapped, What Does This Mean for Employers? I'm Rishi, Field Marketing Manager, and I'm going to give you a quick introduction to Worksome before we meet our host, Contingent Workforce Expert Matthew Matola from Human Cloud, and Worksome's very own Compliance Director and IR35 Expert, Ray Walker. Just to note, we initially planned to speak about the IR35 repeal before the mini budget U-turn, but now our experts will be focusing on the current landscape following the scrapping of the repeal and where we go from here. Also, I just want to make everyone aware that we are recording this webinar and we'll be sharing it as part of our follow-up activity. So who are Worksome? Worksome is the home for your external workforce. It was founded in Copenhagen in January 2017 by a team of ex-Google superstars, and we currently have offices in Copenhagen, New York, and London. Why Worksome? Trusted by over 1,500 companies, including some of the world's leading brands. Worksome is a new standard in external workforce management, helping you save time and money on your contractor workforce. Worksome clients can benefit from finding, contracting, and paying external workers in one click, optimizing external workforce operations, and insurance-backed IR35 worker classification. And just to add to this point, we were proud winners earlier this year of the Talent Tech Tiara Award for Best Compliance Solution. I'm now going to pass you on to our host, who will give you a quick introduction before we get started. We want this to be an interactive session, so please do submit any questions you may have, and we'll try our best to answer. Matt, if you'd like to introduce yourself first, then Ray can follow before we get started. I'm going to leave the next slide up for a couple of minutes so you can see the key discussion points.
Awesome. Thanks, Rishi, and thanks, everyone. Excited to speak with you all. I'm coming from Savannah, Georgia, if anyone knows where that is. So I'm the CEO of the Human Cloud. We are very specific in helping leaders accelerate their freelance applications. Everything's from freelance programs to understanding some revenue models related to the freelance economy. So sort of my background is I've been helping over 100 enterprises now in their freelance journey. And it was helping Microsoft was one of the big ones, but also published a book called The Human Cloud now 2 years ago. But I think you all know this. It actually was written about 4 years ago, so before COVID happened.
Thanks, Matt. I'll pick up the baton. Hi, everybody. I'm Ray. I am the long-titled Contingent Workforce Compliance Director at Worksome. Essentially, every single one of our freelancers that we work with, I've got a responsibility for making sure that they align with whatever laws and regulations that are relevant to them. I've got just about 22 years experience of doing this in a good number of countries around the world, so quite a good level of exposure at least. So whilst we're going to concentrate on the UK here, with Matt's inclusion here as well, it will show you that this sort of a challenge with regards to worker classification is a global problem, not just one that concentrates on the UK right now. So, Rishi, do you want me to just pick this up from here?
Yeah, if that's okay. Yeah, so I'll leave these discussion points up for a couple of minutes so people know what we're going to cover. But yeah, if you'd like to get started, that'd be great. Yeah,
sure. I'll give a bit of background for those who perhaps haven't paid any particular attention to what's happened in the UK recently. So the repeal was effectively along the lines of IR35, which the reforms that came into position, which meant that the end users of the freelancers in the UK were the ones that had to determine whether they were going to be employed or self-employed. There was a surprise announcement that those were going to be taken away, and obviously since that time, in the 5 weeks that that's happened, there's been drastic changes within the UK government. One of the changes was to actually reverse that repeal, meaning that ultimately the reforms that were installed in the private sector in April of 2021 are as you were, and will continue, so that the client has the responsibility for determining whether their freelancers are employed or self-employed. And Matt, one of the things I'm just going to put onto this is to sort of like set the scene for everybody with some of the commentary that I've seen out in the marketplace. I've got a couple of very quick quotes here. None of them are positive. I think it would be quite easy for everyone to understand. So the first one is the scrapping of the rollback of the 2017 and 2021 IR35 rules is disappointing. This will add to the confusion in the contractor marketplace and will also do nothing to improve the agility and flexibility contractors offer UK PLC. The next, this U-turn by the new Chancellor Hunt will be bad for business and bad for genuine contractors. both of whom will have to find some other way to manage IR35 reform's unwieldy elements. The last one, some will be genuine B2B contracts that now can't go ahead because of company policy in place that prevents a client from taking the administrative burden and potential tax debt liability of engaging PFCs. I think that shows, Matt, okay, they're three selected sort of quotes, but it shows the negativity around this IR35 and the way it's managed and the constraints it puts on the freelancer marketplace. Be good to sort of understand from your side of things what this means. Obviously, I come in from sort of like the client's perspective and managing their side, but I know you're very much in the freelancers camp and supporting them and for their better good. So what challenges do you sort of sit back and see that this is going to mean for your side of the fence, shall we say?
Yeah, no, thanks for framing that, Ray. So my background is, and where I sit, it's unique in that I've been freelancing for 10 plus years. And to me, freelancing was more normal than jumping a traditional job. And so sort of the way that I got my feet wet in this industry was I was going down the traditional path of get a good job, get good grades, and I did get into one of the big four. So I had that, yet freelancing was the only avenue for me that really gave me opportunities. So I have a very strong freelancer first tilt, and I've never given up that freelancer first lens, but I've seen the other side. And so I've built out freelance programs at Microsoft and 100 plus enterprises. So I've seen that what freelancers want isn't necessarily practical in some ways, and had to bridge, because it feels like there's two separate camps, right? There's freelancers, there's leaders. Most leaders haven't freelanced before, and most freelancers haven't sat in that leadership position. And so just, that's my bias. In terms of the impact of this, the first thing is that the freelance economy won't go away, right? That genie's out of the bottle. I have some stats in front of me right now that are specific to the EU. They actually came out last week. And this is 80% of freelancers state they'll be freelancing in 12 months' time. The second one is that many freelancers are earning well above the average EU salary. And then the kind of crazy one to me was 7 out of 10 workers in the Nordics were thinking about freelancing. So that's very EU lens. Here in the US, majority of workforce will be freelancing in the next 5 years. There's all these stats. So the freelance economy won't end. What will be challenged is the individual freelancers' control and ability to work how they want. Because you companies, you're still going to need contingent talent. This doesn't end. The difference is you're going to have added restrictions, meaning you're going to have to collaborate with your partners more, meaning that the partners are going to have more control rather than the freelancers themselves. So in terms of the raw impact as an industry, there's some very specific impacts, but at a high level, the freelance economy is not stopping. There's no stopping this. You companies still need contractors more than ever. The difference is you need to get contractors in a compliant manner because the stakes are higher in terms of how bad you can get sued.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a quote I got thrown at me when the reforms were coming into place was, "Is this the end of contracting?" Of which I went, "No, of course it isn't." It's a hurdle that's got to be overcome. And there's no doubt when this was released in April 2021 in the UK, there was a definite change by certain tier 1 clients on how they would engage with their freelance talent, and a certain fear, and that's what sort of prompted the changes, and that meant that they sort of backed away a touch. But we're now 18 months nearly since that was released. It is actually 18 months, and in that instance we're now seeing that people have, certainly with the level of certainty in the UK perspective now, because of the way the government's gone, is that IR35 reforms are here and you've got to work with them, is people have got to learn to sit back and go, if they want to work with the top talent, they've got to adjust their processes. They've got to, as you say, they've got to adopt these, work out ways of how to find a solution to keep enabling you to work with the top talent, whilst at the same time aligning with these rules and trying to, I think, kick back against the rules, kick back against what's being imposed is probably, dare I say, useless right now. It's not going to do anybody any good. And I think from, again, as you mentioned European statistics there as well, and we see it in the US, we've got, any developed country's got this same challenge going on. It's how does the taxman get the money that they need, and how does the freelancers get the freedom that they need? How do the clients make sure that they're not sort of like incurring unneeded risk on their business whilst it's doing that. And that's just sort of like the challenge that we've all got to go with. So what do you think that companies, I suppose, and the freelance market itself, what have they got to do to adapt to be able to get into this world and sort of work in a compliant way?
Yeah, the short answer is you have to be proactive, right? That's the very short answer. For the past 10 years, when I say you, I mean, the enterprise companies, the enterprise procurement, legal, HR, and product departments. They've been able to do this rogue, right, and off the cuff. And if you look at a contingent talent budget, let's say it's above $1 billion, usually 1 to 10% of that is going towards more of the freelance marketplace side or the independent contractor side. And that hasn't really raised alarms. And so every single company, one of our favorite exercises was just telling leaders, look at the credit card statements, because every company has statements from Upwork, Fiverr, various marketplaces. And some companies are even having independent contractor contracts, SOWs signed without procurement's visibility. And what this is doing is this is basically just saying there's more risk now, and there's more of an impact that you're going to face. And so everything from onboarding to bringing in the right partners to being able to manage multiple marketplaces, because we're starting to enter a multiple marketplace dynamic. It's no longer just partner with one freelance marketplace, you need multiple. So sourcing, the onboarding, the actual post triage, so quarterly looking at all the projects that went by the pipeline, was there IP risk, was there security risk? We're having to be proactive now. And so it's been fun the last 5-10 years in terms of you've been able to go rogue in that 1 to 10% independent contractor budget. But now we just have to formalize the processes we already have. And let me be very clear, right? Because this is where what I love about our dynamic is I understand what I don't need, or how do I say it? I understand 1% of this, right? But that 1% is what I really need to know. And there's only 2 things that are gonna get you in deep trouble. The first is if it's been 10 years and you haven't been classifying employees correctly, the government will say you owe us 20 to 30% tax on all of the wages that you paid to independent contractors, right? So that's a massive, massive tax bill. The second is all of your contractors come together and say we should have been paid this amount, or we should have had those stock options, or we should have had those benefits. And that's what happened to Microsoft in the early 2000s. Both are extremely avoidable if you are proactive. So that's the raw impact, is just simply being proactive now and not reactive.
And I agree massively, and that's kind of what we've done with that as well. And you talk about having that 1% knowledge on what you absolutely must know. And the part that certainly I try to put upon our clients is I don't expect and don't need and don't want them to be experts around IR35. It's not their job. Their job is to be experts in what their job is. And it's our job to make sure that we're sort of coming in and highlighting and showing them the parts they need to be concerned about, the sort of turning all of the very difficult legislation, put it into a layman's terms that they can understand and they can work with, and they can then sit back and put it into context. And that's one of the things I spend so much time with, is actually trying to put everything into context. You can sit back and look at the words and they go, I don't know what that is. You explain it to them and they go, oh, well, that's actually really, really simple. And you're like, yeah, exactly that. And it's when you take it and you simplify it, then you start seeing clients who really are open to saying, oh, wow, so if we perhaps do a little tweak here and a little change here in their business practices, they can then easily take on these challenges of IR35 in the UK. They can easily start working with these freelancers that they perhaps had said, oh, they're just too high risk for us right now. And they don't have to worry about it. I mean, in practical terms, IR35 itself is the reforms is somewhat logical, in the sense of you've got to judge whether somebody looks or feels like a worker or self-employed. You've got to distribute some literature on that. You've got to be open to listen to the freelancer if they're not happy with what's going on with that. And outside of that, you've got to have all of that audit evidence sitting there as well, so that when somebody comes in some years down the line and wants to look at this and question it, you can drag all that out. But that's a real high level use of what that is. And as you say, using the right partners, using the right systems is going to be able to manage that and take that forward in the right way. So when I look at it that way, we then sit back and, as I say, I've spoken to clients, or had words with clients where they've shut down the use of working, certainly in the UK, with PSCs, with people who are in the scope of IR35. why is it that, what can we do really to sort of help everybody aware, including the freelancers, because the freelancers really struggle when they've had their projects shut down because they're considered at risk. What is it that we can do here to sort of try and turn that on and show people, actually, look, it's quite easy to work with this? What's the solutions to help them and sort of open up their barriers and remove that sort of risk of working with these PSCs?
Yeah, so I mean, the quick answer is don't break the requirements, right? That's like, if only that was the perfect answer, was, hey, there's 6 requirements and just follow those. And unfortunately, you're guilty until proven innocent, and those requirements in general are kind of arbitrary until you get to courts, and then however, they can go either way. So that's the very short answer. The long answer, at least from what I see, is you have to go from having a project mindset to a program mindset. And so what I mean by that is, project is, hey, let's bring in this freelancer once, or let's bring in freelancers for this one project. Program mindset is, how do we scale compliantly our use of freelancers, which usually means going from $1 million to $100 million annually of spend. And so, to make it really tactical, when I started from the company side, this was 2016, 2017. I was early at a company called Gigster. We did custom software dev, and we would have teams of freelancers. It worked tremendously, but it worked in a project way. And so North America's largest motorcycle manufacturer, we built out their full digital rider experience, but it was a project, right? It was a 2-year SOW project, and that was it. Hop into Microsoft and enterprises, and they need to go beyond just one project, and they need to give access to their marketing teams, to writers, to designers, to SEO experts. And so they need to work in a much more dynamic way with these freelancers. So they need to set up a program, because the program is what's making sure that when your analyst over in the Xbox team or whatever it is, when they're hiring a freelancer, they're doing it in a compliant manner. They're not just having shadow employees. And so that's the biggest mindset shift, is going from a project mindset to a program mindset. And once you go program mindset, it then becomes, instead of being reactive, being proactive. So that is usually the clients that don't do it right. It's usually because they keep switching the person that's responsible for driving the freelance program, or they keep doing it in a project way and expecting that it'll be different the next time. And so that, I'd say, is the biggest shift, is just go from project to, okay, let's have a full program where we know we're going to spend $100 million on independent contractors in the next year.
So is that good control at the top end to sit back and sort of, as you say, stop it so it's not shifting around too much, and you're not sort of changing the people who are sort of in control of that, so that you can roll it out in a much better way. One of the other elements I come across regularly when talking to our clients is about controlling those freelancers. And I haven't come across any great way. So any suggestions you've got on that, Matt, then feel free to help out. Because of that, it's very much
just don't treat them. It's funny. It's kind of related to the question too of how do you have a good freelancer experience or a good contractor experience? In the end of the day, they're no different than employees. They're just employees that take on a lot more risk because they have a contract that can end in 3, 6, 9, 12 months, and they're accountable to outcomes or impact. So in terms of that, I love the question, the direction of the question, because it puts them into separate. It's like, okay, how do we handle our contractors? No. They probably worked for you for 5 years and now they're contracting for you, or they worked for a competitor. So don't try to treat them differently or recreate the wheel. But to your point, the control aspect, you have to make sure that they're not working more than 40 hours a week. You have to make sure that they do have multiple different sources of income or multiple clients. I like to think, for you as the individual company, that's beyond your scope. That's where your partners come in, because you can't have your hiring managers caring about that. They already have enough of their own individual job. So don't throw it on them. Make sure that the program has the controls in place from the start, which usually turns into make sure you have the right partner relationships so that you're starting from the right place and not just being reactive.
I agree. One of the other parts of control that I always get, that I see, is that they want to bring in this specialist freelance, and they want to tell them how they're going to do the job and when they're going to do the job. And you're going, hey, look, you really can't have your cake and eat it here. What you've got to do is, if you're bringing in this specialist, you've got to let the specialist tell you. You've got to let the specialist direct you. And I can understand where the lawmakers come into this, and try and sit back and pick that apart, because it is a case of that's an employed structure. You are telling them what you want to do, when you want to do it, and how you do it. And my point on that, if that's the case, is you can't change that. You absolutely cannot, because that's the way the program's going to run. Then consider whether you have an employee, and take on that, even if you're taking on like a fixed term employee as opposed to an open-ended one. You know, let's look at it differently, as opposed to just moving to picking a contractor because that's what everybody does. It's about sort of, you know, horses for courses is the right word, I would say.
And to add to your point though, Ray, I think where independent contracting is going is it's the experts that are able to do it. So in the next 5 years, what's really different is that the people that are jumping into independent contracting, it's getting easier and easier and easier to do it. So it used to be, it would be the 35-plus-year-old veteran that instead of retiring, set up a consultancy, and that was an independent contractor. Now it's the person who's worked at Google, Microsoft, Facebook, whatever for five years, and they've realized they can be a fractional analyst or a fractional consultant. And so to tell them how to work, it's just kind of ridiculous. And so if you want that relationship, go work with a cheap agency, right? An independent contractor, especially going forward, they are so good that they can do it on their own. They don't need to have a perpetual, employment agreement. So that's the way I'd put it. If you think you need to tell the contractor what to do, you're working with the wrong contractor.
I totally agree, and I have this conversation as well with regards notice period with an independent contractor, and I always say you should have no notice period with them. They're judged on their results, and it's in that way. And a true independent contractor will have no issues with no notice period, because you're just a part of their income stream. You're not necessarily all of it. And if they lose that part, they'll go and find somebody else quite quickly. And as we say, they should be rewarded in the right way. Kind of leads me on to that. What I suppose where I see the market going, and what I hope I see the market going, is that two tiers that we've got at the moment. We've got that independent, that high earning contractor, and then you've got the gig economy, which is your drivers and your delivery people and what have you. I'd love to see a shift from if required in a legal landscape, definitely, to be able to go, hey, look, these are your sort of your typical high-end consultancy type individuals. These are your gigs, and because it's the gigs that need the protections. When governments are coming in, different departments are coming in and trying to put labour protections around people, those are the ones that need it, and rightly so. The ones who are working at that sort of more higher earning end of the scale, they generally don't ask for these protections. And coming from yourself, I mean, you've worked in that environment, you've been a freelancer yourself. How does that sit with you? Is that something you go, do you know what? Yeah, legislation around certain parts would really help everything and help to then differentiate the two different sides of that coin.
So I'll start with personal. I'll then go into the macro of all freelancers. From personal side, I don't want anyone telling me how to run my business, right? That's why we got into to having a freelance business rather than being an employee, right? And so when it comes to government legislation, we don't need government to legislate us, right? Like that just doesn't make sense. When it comes to all freelancers, the overwhelming, I think it was like 63% of freelancers, not to get too technical, the number one reason for freelancing is flexibility followed by control. That's totally misaligned with any type of government legislation telling them how that they should work. So now the second part of your question though is gig economy and sort of where's it going? There will always be a gig economy. There will increasingly become a fractional economy that looks a lot more similar to existing working teams than it does the gig economy. And that has tremendous implications because even marketplaces today are built around that gig economy, whereas newer marketplaces and marketplaces tomorrow will be built around fractional resources and working relationships that do look no different than what they already look like internally. And so I think when it comes from a legislative perspective, I assume what's going to happen is that, and this is a strong assumption, is that the gig economy models will be taken over by companies, and the fractional models do not need companies, and marketplaces will become more of partners, and it'll be more of the integrators. I mean, for example, Worksome, right? It'll be more of the integrators that don't say, here's a network of 50 million people, but rather here's a channel to access different marketplaces. And I think from a legislative perspective, from the freelancer side, we don't need government telling us what to do. And government isn't freelancers, so they're never going to be able to tell us better how to do our job, right? But with that said, there are the protections in place for the gig economy, and I think that's going to become, I mean, we use the word Uberized, that's going to become handled by companies, and so go legislate those companies, don't go legislate the individual freelancers.
I agree, yeah, definitely legislating against the companies is the best way. Governments tend to run away from that, and just trying to bring it back sort of like to where we are in regards to the IR35 side of things. I definitely think that if you're looking at your business and you're looking at the freelancers and you're saying, do they sit into that fractional sense? I like that word, by the way. Or do they sit into that kind of gig sense where they're sort of effectively quasi-employees? Then you can then manage your processes correctly. Don't try and sort of run the quasi-employees through an IR35 test. It's a waste of everyone's time and money. You might as well just find how they're going to be employed. They've got to be employed, so who's going to do that? And it's either through yourself or through partners. It's those ones that sit in that fractional sense that you can concentrate on that. And in that instance, if they are high end, if they do have specialist skills, then you're willing to then drop some of the controls that you put over them. You can change your approach. You can start to put sort of different ways of engaging with these individuals and dropping that sort of, hey, these are just employees dressed up slightly differently. The IR35, and not just in the UK, but in the equivalent in other countries, can be managed quite easily. It's when you're trying to blur things that's where it's sort of causing the issues, I feel.
100%. And then the best practices of working with fractional resources are starting to merge with the legal frameworks. And a quick example of that is control. It's best practice to give your good fractional employees the control of where they work, how they get things done, as long as you align on what that outcome will be or the impact that they need. And that's also in line with the legal frameworks.
Cool. I feel like with Richard joining us, he's about to tell us Sam's a timer catching up with us.
Exactly. Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes left. If we want to start wrapping up, maybe we can summarize.
Yeah, I think we've just kind of sort of done quite a good summary there, which is, first and foremost, really understand your workforce, and you've got to work with these the legislation that's out there. You can't fight against it. It's not going to change. Taxman's got to get their money where it's due. We've got to work with freelancers because that's where the world is, exactly where the world's going, and just increasing on that. And we've got to be able to do that in a way that means that the clients are not overburdened with risk. But it is a case of sitting back and looking at it from afar, working with the right channel partners on that, working with the right systems to be able to manage that. And then it doesn't become necessarily such a massive burden. But it's being realistic as well and understanding that you can't put a square peg into a round hole. It's about finding where the round pegs are and putting those together.
Yeah, and I would add, so to summarize it all together, I mean, the genie's out of the bottle in terms of the framework for freelancing is here and it's not going away. And when we think about that, the technology is here to make freelancing possible. And a good framework I learned early in my career was you always have the economic, you have the social, and you have the technology. Economically, you can make more as a freelancer. Socially, it's become acceptable, and technologically, it's actually easier to work remote in a fractional basis than it is to go work in an office every single day. And so that's not going away. The sort of guiding message I'd say for everyone is let us independent contractors do what we do best, and we're going to figure out how to work with you. And for you, it's be proactive in creating a bridge and ways to get us in the building. And when I say we're going to figure it out, we're going to figure out incorporation. We're going to figure out how to have multiple clients. We're going to figure out how to make sure that we're keeping you out of risk. The good ones are, right? The top 10% of independent contractors. It's up to you to make sure that it's a smooth landing into your organization, because you are going to need independent contractors. And if you don't, I mean, you don't have to, right? But good luck getting stuff done when you have the talent shortage that's only going to increase.
Agreed.
Cool. Thank you so much, guys. The conversation's been awesome. It's been great to have your expert opinion on such an important topic. I just want to say a big thank you again to Matt and Ray and everyone else who has showed an interest in this webinar. Just quickly before you go, there were some questions we weren't able to answer due to time constraints, but if you'd like more information on anything discussed today or about Worksome in general, please get in touch with our solutions executive, Grace Corville. Her email address is grace@worksome.com. I should be more than happy to help with any questions you may have. Alternatively, you can meet our team in person at our upcoming Worksome World Tour open house event in London. You can visit www.worksome.com/worksome-world-tour-london to RSVP your space. Thanks again, guys. Thanks, everyone. Bye.